Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and I got something a little extra special for you here today, because instead of a jet, I'm actually going to be talking about a helicopter while doing some helicopter gameplay in Ace Combat 7. Now, all of you know that there is no helicopters in Ace Combat 7 outside of enemy helicopters, but there's a mod that adds a playable KA-50. So today I'm going to sit here and I'm going to talk about the Cam-Off KA-50 Black Shark, which is a single-seat Soviet-Russian attack helicopter. Originally, it was developed during the time of the Soviet Union towards the very tail end of the Cold War, and since then it's been adopted by Russia. It is also known as Hokum by NATO, and I'm going to share a little story at the end of this of my time in the service of how I was able to remember and identify this helicopter. This was actually something my tank commander actually had taught me. But it has a distinctive coaxial rotor system. The design began in the early 1980s, however, it wouldn't enter service until August of 1995, after the fall of the Soviet Union, of course. The role of the KA-50 is an attack and scout helicopter. KA-50 and its two-seat variant, the KA-52, also known as the Alligator, was designed for high survivability, high performance, with day and night capabilities. Its armor protection is actually built around the cockpit and the vital systems of the helicopter. The tail itself is actually pretty lightly armored, which I'll get to actually hear that in a bit. It also was designed with crash-absorbing landing gear as well as a crash-absorbing seat. The coaxial rotor allows for improved stability because the Hokum doesn't need a tail rotor. Sorry, not stability, survivability, because it doesn't need a tail rotor. As another snippet too, the KA-50 actually has an ejection seat and was the first helicopter in the world to have an ejection seat for its single crewman. During the testing of the KA-50, one of the KA-50s that they were testing lost its tail but managed to actually return to base without it. Now, I'm sure it wasn't the most pleasant flight because the tail does help a little bit with control, but not actually really all that much. The KA-50 is also fitted with a warning receiver and electronic warfare suit and flare dispenser. Well, it's kind of cool here, this photos. You can actually see the ejection seat handles right there. So you don't have to reach too far away from the stick to get to the ejection seat handle if you need to. The KA-50 is armed with a 30mm 2A42 autocannon. It has a selective fire, which allows it to go fire at the rate of 200 rounds per minute, all the way up to 800 rounds per minute. It has a dual feed system as well. So there's, with your typical machine gun, there's one belt that feeds into the machine gun, into the machine gun breech. For this one, there's going to be two. There'll be one over top of the other one. The KA-50 typically has high explosive frag, incendiary, and armor piercing loaded for its 2A42 autocannon. It has 4 underwing pylons and an additional hardpoint on the wing tips itself. The pylons can have various ATGMs and rocket pods mounted to them. I also believe that it can have fuel tanks mounted to them. So, yeah, actually looking at the current model, if you look where the rocket pods are, I believe sometimes they mount fuel tanks in those positions. Or so I have seen, or so it looks like. The KA-50 participated in the Second Chechen War, the Syrian Civil War, and the current invasion of Ukraine. That being said, a few of them actually has been shot down. As of right now, only Russia and Egypt operates the KA-50 and the KA-52. So far, only 32 KA-50s have been produced, and over 100 KA-52s have been produced. although production on the Hokum continues. Now, let's share a little bit of experience from my military service career. I was in the service as a 19 kilo, for those who don't know. That's an M1A1 tank crewman. Well, that's just a tanker in general. And a part of my job actually was not just identifying armor. Armor identification was very important, but aircraft, particularly helicopter identification, was also a requirement for essentially the job. It was one of my many qualifying things one of my many qualifiers that I needed to do was helicopter identification testing. And when learning about these different helicopters, understand that this was actually the first time I've ever seen a Hokum. Was how am I ever going to remember the KA-50 Hokum versus the Mi-28 Havoc? And what my tank commander told me is, how come? That's how you remember. He said the first time I ever seen the helicopter, he asked himself, how come somebody would design a helicopter that way? And I kind of looked at him and said, you know what? I thought the same thing when I seen the helicopter. How come someone would design the helicopter that way? Pretty much having the coaxial rotor system is what we're talking about. Understand that there's other helicopters in the world that does have a coaxial rotor system like this one, but there's not a whole lot of them out there. And let alone a lot of them actually really hasn't seen service outside of the Soviet Union, let alone, you know, most of them aren't even in service anymore, let alone, as I said, there's not that many of them. There's like 3, maybe 4 that I can recall. And that's excluding the 2 different variants of the Hokum. I'm counting the Hokum as one. Even though there is 2 different variants of the Hokum A is the single seat version, which is the KA-50, and the KA-52 is the Hokum B. Now all you really need to know is that it's a Hokum whenever you're doing your qualification. Now that might have changed, but when I was in the service, we just had to know it was the Hokum. Now that being said, this is not Russia's most produced helicopter, so even seeing these on the battlefield is actually quite rare. There are not as many of them out there. They're not in service with as many countries. As you heard, they're only in service with Russia and Egypt. The big one is the Hind. So when it comes to bad guy helicopters, you're more than likely going to see the Hind than you're going to see the Hokum. No matter which way you look at it, I think it's really cool that a group came together and actually ported this over from Ace Combat 6, so that way we could use it in Ace Combat 7. It's a replacer for the F-104 Starfighter. That being said, they also did some weapon swaps and things of that nature to it. Now, the one thing I will say is kind of bites about this helicopter is, well, there's no real cockpit view. Basically, you have the third-person view, which is you see here, and then you have 2 different gun camera views. Now, the one gun camera view, I think, is more or less supposed to be the cockpit view, and that's more like a filtered gun camera view, in my opinion. And it's fine if you're on the brighter maps, but if you're on the darker maps, you're definitely not going to want that filtered view. So for what it really matters, they just didn't need it at all in general, to be honest. That being said, I think the helicopter works really good, and then actually you can hover with this thing. You can actually lower the speed all the way down to 0, and it will hover. It will not stall out. Very cool, very awesome for these very low attacks and strafing runs that you're seeing me do here. However, that being said, it's pretty easy to get shot down by missiles. It's not very good missile dodging. Now, a part of that is on me. I actually have a mod that actually makes the missiles more realistic when it comes to their homing capabilities, even though it's not like 100% perfectly realistic. Either way, this is the playable KA-50. You can get it on Nexus Mods. I will try to remember to put a link in the video description so you can go check it out yourself. But it's from Koznag, Cherry, Megalith, Growler, and X-Blazed Edge. So, kudos, tip my hat off to those guys. Great work on this Hoka model. It also does come with additional skins. I think it comes with 8 skins, if I recall correctly. And it comes with, like I said, different weapon loadouts. Me, I went for the straight-up missiles because, yeah, the missiles are really great. And basically, you can have a load of 4 of them, even though they're not really a multi-purpose missile. They should be an ATGM, but I'm not going to judge because these things, this helicopter is really cool. And I also like the 30mm cannon that they have on it. It's really potent. It only takes maybe a couple shots to destroy a target with a 30mm cannon. And we're talking heavier targets like the fighters or the tanks. And I actually did a couple times go after jets with the autocannon, actually, and got myself some aerial kills in this thing. So, anyway, folks, that's really going to be it. I'm going to wrap it up at that. Hopefully, you all enjoyed this Skies of Ace Combat video and learning more about the KA-50, as well as just learning some little snippets that I know about the KA-50 personally because of my military experience. Anyway, folks, once again, thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.